Hello, and welcome back to the Simplifiers podcast, where we take topics in business and in life and simplify them. And I'm so excited about today's topic. And, well, okay, let's just be real. It's for selfish reasons. I know that I have said this already on the podcast, and I'll say it again just so that everybody can keep me accountable. In 2020, I will write my first book for the Simplifiers. Release it in 2021. And so, of course, I was thinking, gosh, wouldn't it be great if I could get an expert onto the podcast who could actually simplify how to write your very first book? Aha. So my special guest today is Elizabeth Kracht, and she is the author of The Author's Checklist, and she's also a literary agent with Kimberly Cameron and Associates, plus she's a freelance editor. Perfect. She often participates in writers' conferences nationally and internationally and lives in Tiburon, California. I'd like to welcome to the Simplifiers podcast, Elizabeth Kracht. Hey, Elizabeth.
Hi, how are you?
I am so good, and I have got a million questions for you.
Great.
So here we go.
Thank you so much for having me on your show.
Of course. So I imagine our listeners are small business owners in creative industries, right? So there are wedding planners that tune in, graphic designers, photographers, you name it. And I imagine also there's a few of them out there that are like me, that have been doing their business for quite some time, have gotten to a level of credibility and seniority, and are like, you know what? Maybe I need to write a book and share my wisdom out in the world. So I'm going to frame today's conversation, if that's okay with you, towards nonfiction, not talking about writing a novel. Maybe that's a second conversation another day. But Here we are. We've decided to write a book. Hooray. What's the very first step for a person in your mind?
In my mind, I think the very first step is, kind of embracing the idea of wanting to write a book and sort of owning that like you're doing.
Yeah.
The industry, oftentimes people can find themselves in a position where they need a book to build their brand, yet the publishing industry wants to see a certain amount that, often they want to see that brand is already big. And so authors and entrepreneurs can find themselves in a slight catch-22 where they're kind of not big enough, to land a book publishing deal, but then at the same time, sometimes doors don't open for them without a book behind them. And so I think one of the biggest things is just to sort of embrace the idea that you're going to write a book and start thinking of yourself as an author. Sometimes authors or people that need a book behind them that would like to brand themselves with a book, they kind of feel like it's putting the cart before the horse. They don't feel confident in calling themselves a writer. They don't want to be like a fraud, or they look at themselves like a fraud. But I say, go ahead and embrace yourself as a writer and say that you're going to write, that you are a writer and start building your brand as a writer as well. So
well, I mean, I can tell you firsthand, everything about imposter syndrome kind of bubbles up. Now, I've been in business for 16 years. There's no reason for me to feel like an imposter in the things that I know, like backwards and forwards. But it does come up because it's a new playing field for me. I don't know what I don't know yet about the writing and then publishing and then selling, and marketing and book tours and all the things. You just don't know what you don't know. And that's where I think the fear comes from, right?
Right. And, publishing wants you to look confident as you come in. They want to see you claiming yourself. They want to see that you have a website up, that you're already well into the process of seeing yourself and presenting yourself as a writer and an author. So especially for nonfiction writers, that's the most important thing one of the most important things is platform. So. I'm embracing that I'm an author. I'm legitimate, and I am. I do believe that. I love to write, for the podcast, for the blog, and I have actually started to write excerpts and parts of the book. What's next? Okay, so you're already in a position where you're kind of writing the book. I think one of the things that I think is important that authors do, because sometimes you're trying to get the content down. You already know what needs to go in the book, and so you're writing the content. But one thing that often will help somebody to kind of direct the content and keep things on track is really sitting down and writing writing down what you most want to say. Like, what's the absolutely most important thing that what is your gift? What do you most want to say to your audience? And sometimes what this can help do is just keep the content on track so that you never move too far away from that point. Because sometimes people can just sort of get off track. And another thing is to kind of sit down and think about, 2 or 3 themes that you're working with, because you may have one overall point that you want to make, but maybe there's 3 or 4 things that you're looking at as well that you'd like to make points on, that kind of to help that. And so that's kind of what I suggest people do, is to actually take some time with pen and paper. I usually suggest pen and paper because I think it stimulates a different part of the brain to kind of get creative and just decide, what you most want to say. And one point that I wanted to bring up is that sometimes, some of your listeners may find themselves in an industry that's slightly different from what they think their gift is or what they most want to say. And so, they may find themselves at a different point in life saying, well, this is what I feel my gift is, and this is what I most want to say to people. Yeah. But right now I'm not quite in that industry. So, it might be a nice exercise too for people to kind of figure out whether they're really aligned with what their purposes too.
And I guess, that sparks something in my mind of like, why do you want to relay this message? And, timing as well, right? Like,
right.
Why does it feel so ready now? I mean, does that play into it as well?
Right. And yes. And I think that also you can write more than one book. So maybe this is the book that you're writing right now, but your passion is somewhere else. Your true passion is a slightly different book. Or, as you kind of go through your life, you work on different things. I know I've had a lot of different phases of my life, and I could write, 3 to 4 very different books on the things that I've done in my life. So, it may be that you're writing this book for right now because this is what you're passionate about, but maybe you've done something in the past that you still haven't been able to work through in your mind and start writing about. Maybe it's a difficult topic or, something like that will come later.
So it sounds like to me, from what you just said, like some of the critical questions that I need to answer, that we need to answer right from the get-go is like, okay, what do I want to say and in my work, right? And why? How do we want to help people? Like why, how do I imagine I'm going to help people with this book? I get that sort of creates the purpose. Why does it exist, right? But then I guess at this point also I should be pretty clear or have some sort of inkling of who the audience is going to be, right? Who's going to actually go out and open their wallet and buy the book.
That's true. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You want to know, you kind of want to already have in your mind who your listener is basically, or who your audience is. Yeah. And sometimes that takes, in book publishing, when we write book proposals and things like that, it takes some knowledge and expertise to really understand how to really narrow that down, because most people want to believe that their book is for everybody. Anyone's going to love this book. Yeah. It can be for men and women, but book publishing kind of knows that that's not really the case, that usually there's an age range, there's a gender, it's like people that are associated with buying this, particular book, like self-help books or, whatever the book might be, narrative nonfiction. So usually it's really trying to narrow down your audience and who that listener is specifically.
So, okay. So if I'm narrowing the audience, how specific do you suggest we get? Like, I think this is a book for women who own their own business in creative industries, have been in business for 4 to 7 years, like that kind of level of specificity, or is it something else?
Yeah, if you can break it down like that into, basically what it helps you do as a writer, it helps you figure out who you're talking to. So again, knowing that for yourself is really great, because it will help you to keep your information on track. So if you're not speaking to somebody that's over 55 years old, the kind of language you're going to use is going to be different. You're going to talk differently to that audience, basically. Yeah. And so that's one way to look at it. But for the book proposal, for the audience and marketing section, publishers want to see, how far you can break this down in between, like a primary audience, a secondary audience. And so usually primary audiences are men or women, and usually they're maybe broken down by age, so that you're within an age range. And if you can make that age range also coincide to readers who buy the most books, which I think usually is I think readers that are buying the most books kind of fall in the 45 to 75 category. I think that's where most of the avid readers are. But, so you're looking for ways to tie that information together. And knowing your audience is really great, because it shows also the publishing industry that you've done your homework, but also, like I said before, keep your information on track and not to have an overbroad audience.
Okay, so then an age range of, say, like 35 to 45 years old, female is my primary audience, who happen to be small business owners, blah, 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 like that kind of specificity. Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So you dropped something in there, and I want to clarify what it means. You said a book proposal. What does a book proposal look like? What's included in it?
A book proposal is what we use in the industry to sell your book. So an agent, and actually if you approached a publisher directly, you'd need a book proposal. And it basically is a document that's about 25 pages without the writing sample.
Yep.
Sometimes more, about 50 pages with the writing sample. And then you have your overview, which is sort of, it's kind of the marketing hook. It talks about what the book is going to solve, what problem the book is going to solve. Then it gets into the details of the book, and so any special features that might be in the book, like quizzes or questions or workbook type things, that sort of thing. Then you've got comparable titles. You've got that you have to list that show that there are books in the marketplace like your book. There is a chapter by chapter summary, which breaks down what your book is in each chapter, and audience and marketing, publicity, and promotion, and an author kind of platform or bio, what you're already out there doing in the industry, or to promote your work.
Okay, so this all sounds really in depth. Like that's a big document, almost like a business plan in essence for the book, right?
Yeah.
So then is it the writer's responsibility to create that and pitch that to a literary agent, or is it the literary agent that crafts that and puts that book proposal together and kicks it to the publishers? Like, who creates that book proposal at the beginning?
It's usually the author that creates that, although they can hire somebody to write one, and that'll cost you, more than a few $1,000s probably to do that. But usually what I see is authors come to me. Sometimes they have a really good idea, and I know enough about book proposals that I'll send them back to work on their book proposals. That's mostly what happens.
Yep.
I get underdeveloped proposals, and then I kick it back to them and say, I need you to do X, Y, and Z and send it back to me. And so I'll work with them.
Yeah.
Not every agent does that probably. So agents are very different across the board. And then sometimes you can send out, it's really the idea that catches the agent's interest. So they're willing to work with that author, which I mostly do. But I might be the exception to the rule. Some agents might be like, this is so underdeveloped, I don't have the time to help them.
Right.
And send it,
because I imagine you as an agent, you're looking for something that you believe is going to be profitable. Like it's going to sell books and it has a market share, right? Like that's ultimately at the bottom of the whole reason, right? You're not just doing this out of the kindness of your heart, right? Like you want to find a book that you feel is relevant and timely and has a good market share and will sell and people will love and share and all the things. I mean, it makes me think about Dr. Gary Chapman, who wrote The 5 Love Languages. He was on the podcast a while back. I mean, this book has been the top-selling book for years, right? Sold 12 million copies worldwide. It's been in multiple different languages. It's crazy to me. That's 1 in a million, but that's what every agent's hoping for, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Because we're kind of like gamblers, actually, a little bit salespeople and gamblers, because we only get paid on commission.
Right.
So, a lot of what's kind of heartbreaking is that we do put a lot of time and energy into things that eventually don't sell.
Right.
And then, or they sell way down the line with another agent and you're just kind of like, darn, like I was too soon or whatever, ahead of my time. And then, and the author, goes on to sell it at some other point.
Yeah.
But that's really the hope, is to to have projects circulating that we're able to sell.
Right. So with the book proposal itself, then if the author is the one to create the first draft, at least, are there templates out in the world? Like if somebody were literally to Google book proposal template right now, would they find something that would help them kind of get a gauge as to how to put one together?
That's so funny because that's kind of something that I actually am working on right now. But no, there's no real templates that I know of, but there are book proposal books. And so the book that I've written has a breakdown of the book proposal. And there are a few others that I mentioned in my book as well that basically you would just Google book proposal books, on book proposal writing. And there are a few that will come up. And a lot of the ones are written by agents. So the ones that are written by agents are perfect because you want to be able to appeal to the agent, right?
Right.
And have it up to that standard. So yeah, there are a number of book proposal writing books out there, and it's really not that complicated. It's more daunting sounding than it is, but for your listeners who are probably people that are really organized, especially at starting businesses and things like that, for them, they're going to look at it and it's going to be a lot easier for them than most people probably, because they're like, okay, I just have to fill in this section today and take it, week by week, and it's really not that complicated to do once you just do it little by little.
So then in your opinion, then, if you're writing a book asking for a friend, do you need to have the whole book written before the time you've actually started working on the proposal? Or, what does the chicken or the egg come first? I don't know.
Right. Well, for fiction, you have to have the whole book written. And for memoir, you usually have to have the whole book written unless you have some kind of connection. But for nonfiction, technically, you can just have probably 2 to 3 chapters written. So you've got the book proposal, and then you've got 2 or 3 chapters that go as the writing sample along with it. And you can sell the book on, based on sample chapters.
Wow. And so that means that in the book proposal, there is a table of contents that outlines kind of the arc of where you're going, but you still can flesh it out as you go along after you've sold it off. Right?
Right. You need to have it as well articulated as you can. So you actually need to think out the full structure of the book and write it out as though this is exactly how it's going to go.
Right.
But the reality is that you may at some point during the writing process after you sell it realize you're missing a chapter on, something, and need to switch things around for better flow of information. So, that's all part of how it goes and how it works. So
got it.
That's expected.
Okay. So back to kind of starting questions. So I guess, figuring out what type of genre you want and what's best for your message. How do you do that? Like, what are the different genres first off, and then, specifically for nonfiction?
Well, it just depends on the type of book that you're writing. So if you're writing nonfiction, you could fall in any genre, narrative nonfiction, self-help, do-it-yourself, how-to, memoir. And so basically, what I would suggest is that that you take anybody who's looking to kind of figure out what's the best style for what they're offering is to go into the bookstore and actually just kind of tool around and look at the self-help, do it yourself, how to, whatever genre you think you might fit into, and then look at the different styles out there and look at how these authors are approaching their work and see if a particular style fits your work the best. Because sometimes people are combining unusual and different elements and they need to actually kind of figure out where they best fit. And you might also look at books that have inspired you, or books that you that you would love to write a book like that, or you think a book like that would suit your particular vocation well, and and just kind of go in there and look at different styles and see where you think you actually fit.
Well, and that's so interesting that you say that, because that also sparks something in me about that I know I've had these conversations before in other ways when it comes to sales and marketing, is thinking about your book in the merchandising kind of point of view. Like what category in the bookstore is it going to sit on? Like what other books is it going to sit next to? And then also thinking about, well, okay, I'm writing this book out of my experience. More than likely, the people who are going to read it are people who are maybe, I don't know, 5, 7, 10 years behind me in their career track as a small business owner. So they are going to like the things that I like potentially as well. So it is so
Right.
interesting when you think about it in the merchandising point of view of like, oh, well, yeah, what do I love and what authors do I admire and what resonates with me will help to dictate how I write my books as well, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, if you say if you're writing a humor book, for example, like humor is a kind of a smaller section, in the bookstores. And not that easy to sell,
Yeah.
you want to keep these things in mind. And a lot of times authors come to us and they think that they're writing in one area, but they're actually not. The book is actually more self-help. It's not. And so sometimes these categories break down into subcategories as well. So sometimes people come in a little bit uncertain. They've got the book and the proposal, but an agent can also tell, okay, this is not technically a self-help book. This fits more in narrative nonfiction or some other category. So as long as you kind of try and go into the bookstore and figure out where you fit, and also take into consideration that that if you're, perhaps like if it's a smaller shelf, it's going to be more difficult to sell that. Would you be better suited to kind of angle your project in a different way?
If it blends into two different shelves, can it be merchandised on two shelves, or does you have to pick one or the other?
I think you usually have to pick one, and then it'll have elements, some other elements. Usually it's one more than another,
Right.
and same with fiction. It's usually somebody comes in and they're writing, upmarket women's fiction with elements of mystery in it. But you wouldn't, if it's not a full mystery that follows a certain style, then you wouldn't want to lead with mystery, because then it might be breaking some of the rules of the genre, sort of that.
Gosh, it's so
So
interesting. Like, I don't know
I
these
know
things. It's like, what? Wow. It's so fascinating to me that
yeah,
there is a business behind it and there's strategy as well. So you
right.
said earlier, like, there are other features that you could include in a book. Like, tell me more about other features, the bells and whistles of a book, like worksheets and recipes and all that.
Yeah, it's just usually it's, if you've just got a book that's straight narrative, it's not visually stimulating, and
Right.
it's not layered enough. And so usually what I'll work with some of my nonfiction authors is trying to figure out ways to layer a project, because especially if you're trying to relate something that's either difficult for somebody, if they can have multiple ways in which they're looking at what you're offering. So for example, like an epigraph, which is usually a quote that leads a chapter.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if you've got some quotes that are kind of giving another layer of your message that readers can look at, it hits them on that level. And then as they're, perhaps reading whatever you're offering, and you have case histories of people that have gone through this experience, and maybe, and as well as your own individual, experience. If they've got 5 or 6 people or case histories that they're looking at, based on exactly what you're offering, it's going to help them to really go, have those aha moments and go, oh, I know exactly how to, kind of approach this in my own work. Tests and quizzes are kind of fun, depending on what the subject matter is, like to find out, is to help that, reader find out more about themselves or where they fall in, the subject matter.
Yeah.
Some books that I've worked on have had recipes at the end that are related to the content. One mystery that I worked on was like that, and it had these cute little recipes at the end that tied into the overall story. And so it really just sort of depends, and they help to layer the project so that, readers really feel like they're getting this full experience.
Yeah, I have so many ideas here. For my first book, which actually I believe that will be a series of books for the Simplifiers, simplifying big topics out in the world. For the first book, at least, I just have this vision of having great like Spotify music playlists in there where they can scan a code and they pop up the music so they can listen to the music while they're journaling and working through the questions in the workbook. I mean, because music's really important with my workflow and how I simplify. But then also integrating case studies or case histories, as you say, from past guests from the podcast, but then also, also clients as well through the coaching. So I have lots of ideas.
Yeah, that's perfect. As you know, I'm not the biggest tech person. We've had some snafus, but yeah, I think that those are really great ways and interactive ways, because it's allowing that reader to kind of go in and out and have a much more layered and rich experience of your work and what you're offering.
Totally. Yeah. And so then what are the best practices in your mind when it comes to the formatting? Like, let's just assume that we're publishing in the US. Like, what would you say there?
Usually publishing in the US, we work with Microsoft Word. And so usually, I would start with a fresh document. Oftentimes I work with authors who have copied and pasted, and there's a lot of glitches to those types of documents.
Yeah.
So I would start with a fresh Microsoft Word document and format it for double spacing right from the start. And, sometimes what I'll see is there will be too much spacing between paragraphs, and it's always supposed to be double spacing. And then, like I said, there's a lot of glitches. Sometimes people try to transfer a document from Pages to Word, and it messes things up. So I would start with Microsoft Word and format the document for double spacing. And, usually you're looking for a lot of uniformity. That's something that I see missing in a lot of proposals is you want everything to look the same. So every time you start a new section, you want that header to be the same size, the same font as the next one, located in the same place. So as, get really, anal retentive or Virgo in nature and really try and, make sure that document looks, just uniform and consistent all the way through.
Yeah.
And basically, I would just start. One simple thing that people can do is just start and, label each section. Just start labeling each section. And then you've got 10 to 11 sections, and then you just begin filling them out.
So, okay, we can go simple and use Microsoft Word, and that's the industry standard. But I also hear about all these other bells and whistle kind of tools that are out there. Like, what's one called? Scrivener, I think it is. Are you familiar with those kinds of formatting tools that are out there that are specifically built for authors?
Yeah, but they unfortunately when they try and transfer them over, that's where the problem gets, because kind of in the industry, agents don't want to click on extra things, or they don't want to have to go anywhere extra to find a Google Doc or to do anything like that. So you want to eliminate any possibility that agent's going to have to come back to you and tell you, listen, this didn't transfer over right, or there's glitches in this. So it's smarter if you can just kind of use the standard industry Microsoft Word. Some people are probably successful at making those transfers, but I've just found across the board that, people should, if that helps you to write your book, it's great. But at some point you're going to transfer, and then you're going to have to reread that document to make sure that transfer has been successful and that it transfers to somebody else successfully.
Right.
So that's the downside of, because I've received Pages and things like that from the Pages, program, and it just never works for me. So
yeah, well, and I imagine also you're pitching an agent and the file doesn't open or it's corrupt, and you're like, ugh, like that's not the best first impression that you could be making in that situation.
Right.
So just use
and some
the
of
tool
us
that
are
they
really.
need.
I'm super nice, so I usually that's not usually a problem for me. But you have to just assume that's the kind of glitch that you get a rejection for, because some people, some agents are not actually reading their submissions. They have interns or assistants that are reading them, and their volume is such that you just want to eliminate any and all possible errors before submitting.
Okay, so now let's imagine fast forward. I have written some key chapters. Maybe I've even fleshed out the whole book, and I've got the book proposal ready to roll. I'm very proud of it. It looks amazing. It's like, gleaming with sunshine. And now I'm ready to go kick this to a few literary agents. A, where do I find them? And B, do I send them to an agent one at a time, wait for the rejection, and then send it to another? Or do I blanket send it out to multiple people, in your opinion?
I think it's smart to send it out to multiple people and not wait. I make people wait a long time just because I have a very difficult time managing my workload as it is. So I wouldn't wait. And it's standard for us to really to know that you're submitting to others as well. So it's not, we're expecting that you're doing that. One thing that we usually do ask is that you keep us in the loop if somebody makes an offer on your book or to represent you, that you at least circle back and tell us so that we get a chance to read your work and then also possibly make an offer to represent you, or so that we don't read your book after you've already signed with somebody else,
Right.
like gone through the process of fully reading it, and then we find out you signed with somebody but didn't let anybody know. So that's kind of how that process goes. In terms of finding agents, there are a lot of different ways that you can find agents. One resource that I always suggest that authors sign up for, which is usually I think $25 a month, is Publishers Marketplace. And this just it's our Bible. It's sort of what we read to see what's going on in the industry, to see what deals are being made.
Yep.
But, most importantly, you can go to the deals section and see what agent has sold what book in your genre. So you can look at thrillers or narrative nonfiction or memoir, and it'll say who just made a deal with who. Such and such agent just sold to such and such editor.
Right.
So that's a really easy way to find them. And then their contact information is also in that database. So that's kind of like a really great hub to use. But you can also look at some of the biggest conferences in the country, whether it's in the UK, somewhere, or in the United States. Usually some of the bigger conferences bring in agents, like 20 agents. So you can go and look at their bios online and see who's representing what. Also, Writer's Digest is another resource where they often list new agents coming into the industry or highlight agents.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of different resources like that online. Even just Google searching, you can, get a lot of information.
So you're looking for agents that specialize in your specific genre of books, because I'm imagining, would an agent who represents, I don't know, murder mysteries be somebody who's also representing self-help books? Is there crossover there?
Yeah, there can be. Every agent's different. So I actually represent both of those genres.
Oh, you do?
So I do nonfiction and fiction and mysteries and thrillers and then, self-help type books and prescriptive nonfiction, things like that. So it just depends on the agent. And my boss also does the same. She represents both sides. Some agents are they're specialized. So they're maybe only representing, fiction or not fiction, fantasy and romance, things
Right.
like that, or science fiction. So it really depends on the agent, but you can find agents that represent both.
Okay.
And it's not uncommon for somebody to have two different agents as well. If one only represents nonfiction and they also are working on a fiction book, they can find an agent to represent their fiction, and usually we don't care.
Got it. Okay. So then I've submitted my book proposal, bright, shiny thing, out to a bazillion agents. I have gotten a bazillion and one rejections, and I'm not hurt by it because I know it's part of the game, right? But then the next one I send out, it is somebody, and they go, oh, this is it. This is the thing. What kind of a deal would one expect? Is there a standard, or what's the next step after that?
The next step would be that we would send you a contract, or we'd probably get on the phone with you and talk things out and, and make sure that it's a good fit, kind of just tell you what to expect. And then we send out a contract that, is usually with agents, it's a standard 15% that we take of anything earned by the author. So if you're running into somebody who is taking more than that, then that's a red flag. Yeah. But usually, most of our contracts are kind of boilerplate things. So there shouldn't be anything very complicated, necessarily about an agent author contract, because they are pretty standard and boilerplate. And then once we sign that, usually the agent will tell you what their vision is for your book. Like if they feel that, that there is going to be some revision necessary, they'll kind of give you an idea of what that's going to look like and how the process is going to go. Yep. And so once you sign, you just sort of get into that back and forth with the agent to get the project ready for submission. And that can take a year, it can take a couple months, it could be ready to go. Yeah. And then the agent goes out with your project to editors.
So then the agent's the one that's going to find the first draft and the second draft to editors for you, right? Or are you, how does that work?
Well, no. So the editors, are the publishing house editors that would buy the book.
Aha.
And so usually the agent will bring you through, make sure that you go through that that period of editorial work. She'll work with you, or he'll work with you to make sure that your work is ready for a publishing house editor,
Got it.
somebody to buy the book. And so, like, for example, I've sent a couple of my clients out to work with freelance editors to get them ready, because I realized, like, their topic was so specialized that I didn't think I could bring them to the point they needed to be at. So we've been working to develop ideas, basically. And then sometimes they come to me and they're already ready to go, and I don't need to do anything but put their pitch together and then send. Our process is like, when you approach us, we approach editors in the same way. So we take your pitch letter, maybe alter it a little bit, and send it to the editor at, such and such publishing house, basically.
Right.
To try and sell it.
And then from there, 1,001 rejections, but then the 1,002 you get a deal, right? So from there, is there a time frame that usually happens from the point where the publishing house goes, yes, this is a great book, to, okay, it's on the shelves? Or does that vary by project?
Sometimes, well, the sale itself sometimes can take a long time, so selling to a publishing house is, sometimes it takes years to sell a book. If, my boss has, taken 7 years to sell a book, which is amazing, because authors nowadays are not that patient. They're like, I'm just going to self-publish it. So my boss will, has had some authors that have just waited, and things in the industry are very cyclical. So things come back around, and interest comes back around in things. And so that can be, it can take a while to get a sale, but sometimes they happen very quick too. So from the time you sign an agent, within a month, you've got a book deal. And then usually that contract process takes some time, with the publishing house, because they send a contract to us, and we want to review it, make sure that we're happy with the terms, or negotiate the terms. And then that can take, 2 months, or, usually it's torture if it takes too long. But then the author starts going, delivers the manuscript. It depends on how long it's going to take them to write it. So if you're submitting a book you've only got 2 chapters written, usually you have about 9 months to finish the rest of the book.
Got it.
But if your book is already written and you can deliver it, then it goes into that process a lot sooner. And publishing, you have to remember, publishing works like a year out, so, you have to add, if it's going to take you 9 months, once you turn that book in, it's going to take a year for that book to come out. So, the timeline is, can be pretty long, depending on where you are in the process.
And see, that's what's so interesting. I think a lot of people don't realize that. And I had heard that through other friends that are authors, and even people that I interview on the podcast that are authors as well. It takes so much longer in the pipeline than you actually think. You think, well, I can write this book in 3 weeks, but that doesn't necessarily mean the finished book, that the book's coming out next month, unless you self-publish, right?
Right.
Which is a whole other ball of wax, maybe for another conversation. But when it comes to self-publishing, then it's your coin that is doing all the steps, right? It's your financial money going into the bank more so, for the editing, for the getting it ready, putting it on Amazon, blah, 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 all that, right?
Right. And, it's like I honestly never suggest people self-publish unless they're really good at publicity and marketing. Like you seem like the type of person that would probably be really great at that because of what you do. You're already out, doing your podcast and a million other things that you're doing. And so, but for people that are, I get a lot of people that come to me after the fact and they're like, well, it didn't really sell because I just didn't do any publicity and marketing. And I'm like, well, I can't help you then because you've already, published. And so, and your numbers aren't good. So that works against you in the industry. If you want a professional career in the future, they look at your numbers. They look at your previous numbers for your previous books. And if they see that the numbers are low, they're going to be less inclined, or they may be less inclined to take a future project on. So, I'm always suggesting that if you're going to self-publish, that you plan it out like publishing does, and make sure that you're working on your publicity and marketing 6 months before the book even comes out, and that you're planning the release date, and that you're planning like a publisher is planning. Otherwise, your book is going to be very hard to be found within, the millions that are being, published.
And that is such a huge aha, to think that, if you want to fast track it and just self-publish publish. You're like, I just want to get it out. I just want to start, pushing this thing out to the world. And if your numbers are low and you want to publish in a bigger way, that's going to be a detriment to you. I mean, that's new information to me. I've just had an aha bing of my light bulb go on there. So thank you for that, Liz.
It's really looking at your future. Yeah, and because it does matter.
Right.
The choices you're making today kind of matter.
Yeah. Well, again, if you are listening to this and you're intrigued, I highly, highly recommend you check out Liz's book. It's called The Author's Checklist, and it's available wherever books are sold online or otherwise. I highly recommend. And what I liked about your book, Liz, was that, again, for me, I don't know what I don't know. It was an A to Z of every little bit of the publishing process, and it reads like a glossary, but then you can kind of dive in from start to finish to read the book, and really helps me get up to speed to even be able to ask smart questions with you today. So yes, highly recommend The Author's Checklist for people.
Yeah, it's one of those books that I feel there's a lot of information in there, a lot of interesting stories, and a lot of information that's relevant to people that are, you may be writing nonfiction or you may be writing fiction, but if you read the nonfiction stuff too, or vice versa, there's a lot of information there that'll just cue you in on how the industry thinks and how it operates, and it'll just overall, give you a better place from which to kind of work on your own projects if you know certain things, or you remember this one story that right. One author made the mistake of not having a blog and had a hard time getting published, that sort of thing. So
yeah, well, and the more you know, the less fear you have, and the more you're actually going to do the thing and get out there and get that book made and created.
I started in the industry, on the author's side. I wanted to get published. And at the time I didn't, I've been wanting to write a book since I was a kid. And at that time, you don't really have much to say. You're too young. You don't have the experience. So it's always been in my nature to want to write. And so I thought, well, I'm going to just get close to the publishing industry to see how it operates. And it just opened my whole world up. Didn't realize it was going to be a good career fit. So it is that kind of thing that if your listeners are wanting to write a book and they align themselves closer to the industry, go to conferences and things like that, it's going to open up their world, and they're going to figure it out a lot faster than somebody who's just kind of going at it and not trying to understand the industry a little bit better.
Yeah. And tell us, what are a couple of good conferences that you would recommend, ones that you enjoy going to?
One of the biggest ones is the Pacific Northwest Writers Association conference, and that one is, I believe that one, I can't remember, I think that one's in September of this year. That one usually has about 400 to 600 people and brings in a lot of agents. I'm also going to be going to the Willamette Writers Conference in Portland, and that also is a larger conference, and they just offer so many workshops and things like that. So I'll be presenting there.
Great.
Thriller Fest in New York is, thriller mystery, it just depends. But there are conferences not only here, but also in Europe and book fairs and things like that people can go to and just begin to learn more about the industry.
I love it. Well, I will put all of those links in the show notes. So if you're listening to this right now, you can go to the simplifierspodcast.com and find all the links of the conferences and everything that Liz is talking about, including her book, The Author's Checklist. So Liz, I have a couple of questions I'd like to ask you that I ask every single person that comes onto the podcast. And by the way, thank you so much for answering my questions and sharing your wisdom with me today. Because,
pleasure.
Let's just say there will be a book coming very soon from this side of the world.
I know, we will talk about that later.
Very exciting, isn't it? So talking about books, what's one book or blog that you're maybe reading these days that's either inspiring you or poking holes and challenging your belief system right now?
Well, I think one that I'm working on right now, and this will give you kind of an idea of how to think about going into the bookstore and looking at books like yours. But I had a conversation with a dear friend of mine named Laurel Lee, who's also a freelance editor and writer, and she edits for Bembella Books. And we were talking about a book idea that I have that I'm working on right now that's a little bit more like narrative nonfiction that brings in some experiences that I had in publishing industry and also about my own personal life. And she suggested I read a book called The Menendez Murders, which is a famous kind of story here in California. And because of the way it was structured, I was telling her my ideas, and she goes, "You may want to check out this book that I worked on." She goes, "Because it has a really interesting structure, and I think that it might work for what you're talking about." And so for me, I'm actually looking at that book. I also looked at I can't remember the title of it, but Michelle McNamara's book, I'll Be Gone in the Dark, I think is the name of the title, at her structure as well, to see if that would be a book structure that would work for me. So these are, the ways that you can kind of approach some of the books that you're looking at and read them not for pleasure, but look at how they're structured, look at how they're put together to see if they'll work for the message that you're trying to put out there. So those are the two books that I'm kind of looking at right now.
Yeah, that's very cool. And we'll put a link in the show notes for those two books also. But I like the idea of, looking at the books for structure, not just for content and getting inspired that way, maybe even in different genres than what you're doing, and to flip the thing on its lid a bit. So yeah, I love that. So, tell us who's one person in your network, somebody that you know personally that you just feel is up to brilliant things. And who knows, maybe we could shine a spotlight on them, and maybe one day we'll have them on the podcast.
Right. Well, I was thinking about that, and I think my client right now that I would suggest for that actually would be Jill Shurer Murray, who has a book coming out called Big Wild Love: The Unstoppable Power of Letting Go. And Jill is, she's a sought after speaker. She has a TEDx talk that's got over 2 million views, and she details and lovely humor this experience that she had of finally letting go of a really long-term relationship and calling in the love of her life. And so Jill, what I love about Jill's branding, and this is a person who's really great in terms of, working with her from the beginning all the way through kind of her branding of herself. She's a really good example of that. Would be really great example for listeners to talk on that level alone. But she also has this process for learning how to let go that she's come up with. And it can apply to any area of your life. It doesn't have to be just for love, but perhaps to bring in the money that you want, or to bring in the success that you're looking for. And so she's somebody that I think is a really great, fun, vivacious speaker that would be somebody that would be great for your podcast at some point.
Excellent. Well, we will link her up as well into the show notes so you guys can check her out. So Liz, where can people connect with you online? So you have your website, elizabethkracht.com, but is there any place on social media that you hang out at?
I am mostly on Facebook because I'm, of the older generation. So I tend to be on Facebook the most. I try to do Twitter, but I'm not super great at it. I'm on Instagram as well, also not the best at it. But if you want to friend me on Facebook, I do allow, I keep it a mix of personal and business. So I'm a little bit more of a circus person on Facebook, so I'm a little outlandish, but it's fun. It's not all business, basically.
Fabulous. We'll put the links for your social media stuff in the show notes as well. Okay. So reminder, everybody, check out her book. It's called The Author's Checklist. It's out now. And also, thank you again so much for your time. My last question for you today is this, Liz. You did great, by the way.
Thank you.
Somebody somewhere, and not just me, is thinking about writing a book, and she is excited, and she's also equally nervous, like she could vomit at any point because it's so scary. What's one thing that you could say right now as an encouraging word to whisper into her ear?
Just go for it. You get it out there. I mean, I'm really driven by heart and passion and what has meaning for us in life. And so I think if this is something that you're passionate about and that your heart really wants to do, you just start getting it down little by little. You don't have to self-edit yourself, all that stuff can come later, but just start getting it down and start writing it down. And I think once you start the actual writing, you're gonna feel it take off, and you're gonna be really inspired. So I would just do it.
Yes, go for it. Do the thing.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
Liz, thank you so much.
Thank you.